The desert wind whipped sand into the faces of the weary Macedonian soldiers, their eyes scanning the horizon for a relief that never seemed to come. They were deep in Gedrosia, a region whose name would forever be etched in history as the graveyard of Alexander's ambition. This wasn't the glorious battlefield where phalanxes clashed and empires fell. This was a war against nature itself, a brutal test of endurance that threatened to break even the most hardened veterans of a decade-long campaign. Alexander, the conqueror of Persia, Egypt, and parts of India, had made a decision that baffled his generals and almost cost him his empire. After his triumphant but costly Indian campaign, where his troops famously refused to advance further, he opted for a perilous march through the Gedrosian desert along the coast, while his fleet, under Nearchus, sailed parallel. His reasons remain debated by historians. Was it a desire to map the coastline, to punish his troops for their mutiny, or perhaps an attempt to emulate mythical heroes like Semiramis or Cyrus, who had reportedly also traversed this desolate land? Whatever his motives, the cost was staggering. Day after day, the sun beat down mercilessly, sucking the moisture from their bodies. Water sources were scarce and often contaminated, leading to dysentery and other illnesses that decimated their ranks. Food became an increasingly precious commodity. They ate their pack animals, then their leather straps, and finally, resorting to foraging for whatever meager sustenance the barren landscape offered. The route was chosen to resupply the fleet, but it was the army that needed saving. The psychological toll was as devastating as the physical. Soldiers who had faced down Persian immortals and Indian war elephants now succumbed to thirst and despair. Stories of men driven mad by the heat, hallucinating oases and then collapsing in the dust, spread through the ranks. Yet, amidst this unfolding catastrophe, Alexander's leadership shone with an almost superhuman intensity. One particularly harrowing incident, recounted by ancient historians like Arrian and Plutarch, perfectly encapsulates Alexander's character during this ordeal. His army, parched and desperate, was slogging through a particularly desolate stretch. Suddenly, a small group of soldiers, foraging ahead, came across a meager trickle of water in a wadi. With immense effort, they collected a helmetful, muddy but life-saving, and brought it to Alexander, offering it to him. Imagine the scene. Thousands of his men, eyes sunken, lips cracked, watching. They were dying of thirst, and here was their king, holding the only water they had found in days. The temptation must have been immense. He had pushed them to their limits, marched them into this hell, and now he held the promise of personal relief. But Alexander, with a gaze that swept over his suffering army, did something extraordinary. Without a moment's hesitation, he poured the precious water onto the sand. The men gasped, not in anger, but in a stunned admiration. "If I alone drink," he declared, his voice firm despite his own obvious torment, "how will my men endure?" It was a theatrical gesture, yes, but one born of genuine empathy and an understanding of morale. It wasn't just about sharing the suffering, it was about demonstrating that he was truly one of them, despite his divine claims and royal lineage. This single act, witnessed by thousands, reverberated through the weary ranks. It ignited a spark of renewed determination, a sense that if their king could endure, so could they. It instilled a belief that Alexander would not abandon them, that he truly shared their fate. The march continued, brutal and unforgiving, and many more lives were lost. However, this pivotal moment of self-sacrifice, coupled with Alexander's relentless personal example, always at the forefront, always sharing their hardships, prevented the army from collapsing entirely. He marched on foot with them, never riding his horse Bucephalus, offering it instead to the sick and injured. He shared their meager rations and endured the same thirst. When the remnants of his army finally stumbled out of Gedrosia and reunited with Nearchus's fleet, the relief was palpable, but the losses were devastating. Estimates suggest that Alexander lost more men in this desert crossing than in any single battle of his entire career, possibly as many as 75% of his initial force. The Gedrosian March stands as a stark testament to Alexander's indomitable will and his profound connection with his soldiers. It highlights a side of the conqueror often overshadowed by his military genius. his capacity for shared suffering, his extraordinary leadership under extreme duress, and his understanding that the strength of an army lay not just in its tactics, but in the unwavering loyalty and spirit of its men. It was a hellish journey, but one that cemented his legendary status, demonstrating that even in the face of nature's most brutal challenge, the will of Alexander and his Macedonians could not be entirely broken.